Do you remember struggling to retain any language that you learned in high school? Unless you dedicated hours of your day practicing that language over and over, most of us only remember how to say things like, hello, my name is such and such. This is where I would like to introduce the critical period hypothesis. Understanding and implementing this hypothesis into early education would not only affect the ability for young children to be able to successfully learn and speak a secondary language, but also create a significant impact on our communities and workplaces. Studying languages has always held my interest due to the difficulty that I actually have learning them. I currently have been learning Korean for the past 5 years and Polish for over 10. At this point, you think I would have a pretty perfect grasp on both languages, or at least one. But if I don't practice every day, I lose about 10 days of what I have already learned. So it's a learning curve forever, basically. Today, I would like to talk about the impact of critical period hypothesis, which supports the idea that early language exposure and development leads to long-term language retention and optimal learning for any other future languages learned. I will discuss evidence that supports the critical period hypothesis and how early education and exposure leads to effective language acquisition. First, I would like to dive deeper into understanding what critical period hypothesis actually is. Originally proposed by Eric Lenneberg in 1967, the CPH, critical period hypothesis, suggests that there is a cutoff point until which it is possible to learn a language like a typical native speaker. This is in direct quotation for the Scientific Direct on their article on the hypothesis called Critical Period Hypothesis. The cutoff point is considered to be from birth to when a child enters puberty. While the specific period has been up to debate for many decades, the fact that it becomes more difficult to pick up a language with the inflection and naturalness a native speaker has is widely held as true across the world. For example, in an article by Anya Kamenetz, What's Going On Inside the Brain of a Bilingual Child, talks about how studies have shown that people who speak two languages often outperform monolinguals on general measures of executive function. Other scholars, like Antonella Soares at the University of Edinburgh, also agree and even add that being bilingual forces you to pay focused attention without being distracted, so that you focus on speaking in the right language at the right time. I would also like to talk about how there are many neurological studies that discuss how brain plasticity decreases by a large amount after puberty and affects the capability to learn new languages. There's a study on language lateralization in children and adults published in the National Library of Medicine that talks about their findings that indicate language lateralization to the dominant hemisphere increases between the ages of 5 and 20 years and plateaus between 20 and 25 years and slowly decreases between 25 and 70 years. I know that sounds very complicated, but what it basically means is that there's a biological precedence to the brain's ability to bring in completely new information and retain it, which means that it becomes increasingly difficult to learn a new language as you get older. After talking about the importance of the critical period hypothesis, or CPH, I would like to discuss how to approach implementing this theory into early education. Prioritizing language learning in early education with exposure to multiple languages allows for better retention and speaking ability as they would have with their first language. Another point that is necessary to discuss is how community involvement can lead to policy recommendations and funding for early language development programs. By implementing community engagement initiatives, we can promote and encourage bilingualism from an early age and create future environments where they will thrive linguistically. Next, I would like to talk about the impact of embracing strategies that implement the critical period hypothesis. Early language exposure has shown to have profound and numerous effects in many studies on children. In another study published by the National Library of Medicine, called Bilingualism and Creativity, talks about how bilingual learning leads to increased cognitive function and ability. In their study, they found that results provide empirical evidence for the relationship and mechanism between bilingual learning and creativity. Overall, the enhanced problem-solving abilities and creativity that bilingual children have been proven to have cannot be ignored. There are many multilinguistical societies in the world that prove to have increased positive communication and foster a natural understanding of cultural diversity. Most job applications have continuing trends of having a secondary language requirement, typically with stipulations of having a natural fluency. By implementing the critical period hypothesis into early education, we can give future generations a better chance of succeeding on an ever increasing competitive workforce. I know that I've given you a lot of new information on how the critical period hypothesis is necessary for effectively implementing early language development and retention in children. We talked about how the CPH, or critical period hypothesis, what it actually is and its importance, and the necessary steps to implement it into early education, and the benefits that it has on people long term. The critical period hypothesis is vital for an optimal learning environment for developing lasting language skills. Investing and advocating in the implementation of the critical period hypothesis will ensure that future children will have the ability to successfully retain and utilize linguistical tools to help succeed in a constantly developing world. This has been my presentation on the critical period hypothesis. I hope that I have given you a lot of new digestible information, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts.